Scott County Democratic Party Chairwoman, newly elected in March, so thank you. I see so many new faces in the crowd tonight, and I'm so grateful for that because I really want to encourage you all to make sure you don't just come out tonight, but you come out to caucus. We have a huge responsibility as Iowans to be that first in the nation caucus, and we have a great opportunity to really have our voices heard and have that ripple across our country. We get to meet these candidates, look them in the whites of their eyes, and make sure they're good people. And I'm here to tell you, we have no shortage of good people running this time. So I'm here today, I'm delighted that I was invited here by the Beto campaign to come and talk to you for a few minutes ahead of time. I do want to take a few moments and introduce a few of our elected officials that are here around the room. I do see Rich Kluel with Davenport City Council. And I have Ellen Slagle with Bluegrass City Council. And we have former Mayor Bill Galuba and former state legislator. And I don't know, I may be missing a few more in the back, y'all. I'll give you guys a quick minute to yell for yourselves. Okay. All right. We'll get going because I know you don't want to hear me talk all night. Well, for me, I endorsed Barack Obama in 2007, and I was in the state legislature at the time. Thank you. I think you turned out pretty well. But I was happy to endorse him in 2007 and be the first Iowa legislature to do so. And when I worked for his campaign across the state, everywhere there was a message, and it was respect, empower, include. And that's really what I think the heart and soul of the Democratic Party is. Be respectful of one another, be inclusive of one another, and empower all of us to be our best. And I think that really sums up, and I think, you know, they talk about the next Barack Obama. I don't know that we'll have a next Barack Obama, but we have some fabulous individuals, and I do know that Beto O'Rourke really centers in on this message. Be respectful of one another. He has served in the state of Texas, where, you guys, it's like Western Iowa all across the state. There goes any shot I had a statewide office. But honestly, though, we need to make sure that we're seeing there's so much divisiveness in our culture and in our society, and especially in politics now. We need to be making sure that we see each other's similarities and not our differences. And we have far more similarities to one another than we do differences. So I'm really happy to be here today. I'm happy that we have a candidate here that also believes in those things, and I'm happy to introduce to you Beto O'Rourke. Thank you.
How's everybody doing? Good to see you all. What a good-looking group of people that are here. Chairwoman Gaiman, thank you for the introduction, for reminding us that this is all about respect, for encouraging us to remember how beautiful both Texas and Western Iowa are, as well as Eastern Iowa and the rest of the state, that we are all in this together at the end of the day. That's the important thing to remember at this moment. And let me tell you, to the great people of Davenport, this is an extraordinarily beautiful community. We got in last night, so I didn't get to see it as I came in. It was too dark already. Got dinner, got to bed relatively early at the hotel, and then woke up at the break of day and ran along the Duck Creek, which was just really peaceful and amazing. And that little creek has more water in it than the Rio Grande, which is the river next to where I live. So it was nice to be there. We got this great tour of downtown riverfront Davenport with Paul and the Chamber and business owners who had been literally flooded out of their businesses. Great River Brewing, I don't know if anyone's had a beer there, but really support them when they reopen. Their tasting room is going to be back online in July. They were under feet of water, so much of their equipment was damaged. 25 employees, and they're struggling to make ends meet right now. So we're going to all be there for them when they reopen. We got to see this place that was literally going to open on Cinco de Mayo. but the flood prevented them from doing it. It's a by the slice pizza joint called Low Pies. Yes, Low Pies. Connor, do you have the Low Pies logo on your canister? So new business, young folks who had moved back to this community could live anywhere they wanted to in the country or the world, and chose Davenport to plant their flag and make their investment and start their by the slice pizza company here, which I thought was great. So I want to support them when they're back open. Dress for Success. It's this amazing nonprofit where they help those who are going for job interviews or re-entering after maybe spending some time in the criminal justice system to be dressed for that interview. That place flooded out, thousands of dollars in damage. And what I heard is that the community has rallied to their side. We're holding a fundraiser, the community is, in the not too distant future to make sure that they can get back on their feet. I love the way that this community has come together for one another. Following that, we had this great meeting with labor leaders, including some of the steel workers. And they were telling us about their challenge with Arconic and trying to negotiate what they have earned through their work, and how this community has rallied to them as well. So we keep them in our thoughts as they go through some tough labor negotiations right now. A reminder again that we are all in this together, facing some really tough challenges for this country. And it's why I'm here, and I hope it is why you are here right now. It's why I'm running for President of the United States of America. We face the greatest set of challenges that this country has seen in its history. An economy that has left so many behind. A system of healthcare where tens of millions cannot see a doctor or afford their medications or be well enough to live to their full potential over the course of their lifetime. And as we just saw in Davenport, and on the other side of the state up against the Missouri, climate change is here. It is real. It is taking lives. It is taking property. It is wiping out entire communities. And we must face it before it is too late. And then just to make this interesting, we've got this guy in the White House who seeks to divide an already highly polarized country, attempts to undermine an already badly damaged democracy. Now, my whole life has been about bringing people together and trying to make sure that this democracy works for everyone. When 20 years ago, just like the Lopez brothers have done here in Davenport, I moved back to my hometown. I started a small business and found a way to help those who were looking for work and had something to share with the rest of the world, find a way to do it high skill, high wage, high value jobs in one of the poorest communities in the United States of America. Served on that El Paso City Council in a nonpartisan position, neither a Democrat nor a Republican, just getting after it with my fellow El Pasoans to make sure that we delivered and to keep me accountable and to ensure that I remembered who put me in this position of public trust. Every single week for 6 years, I held a town hall meeting just like this one. It helped me to ensure that we balanced a budget every single year that I was in office, and that we took on the hardest of challenges, but that we always did that together. In the United States Congress, for 6 years, every single day of that in the minority, the only way to get anything of any significance accomplished was to find the common ground both with Democrats and with my Republican colleagues. It's how we expanded access to mental health care for veterans who come back from serving this country's wars, who needed to be served when they came back to this community so that they were well enough to be able to deliver here just like they delivered in uniform. It's a way that we protected our public lands, delivered for those who we serve, regardless of party, affiliation, or any other difference that might stand between us. And then last year in the state of Texas, with the help of many here in this room, let's hear it for Texas. I led the largest grassroots campaign in the history of that state without a single dime from a single political action committee or corporation or special interest. We helped to take a state that was 50th, dead last in voter turnout, to a state that today is a contender in our national politics. We've unlocked the 38 electoral college votes in Texas so that whoever the nominee is, they'll have to spend time there from both parties to make sure that they listen to my fellow Texans and that our issues and concerns and stories become their issues and concerns and stories. And we did this by assembling a coalition, a movement of young people who turned out at an increase of 500% over the last election, of Democrats, of independents, and yes, also of Republicans too. Making sure that before we define ourselves by any other label, we are Americans first. We need to bring this country together. We need to make sure that this democracy works. It's the only way that we're going to defeat Donald Trump in November of 2020. It's the only way we'll bring this country back together again around our priorities in January of 2021. It's the way that I've served and led my life, and it's why I'm running to serve you as President of the United States of America. Thank you all for having us out. And thank you to RME for hosting us. I was told just before I came out that you all have provided musical education to more than 30,000 right here in this space through the programming that's here. So please continue to support this world-class organization. And thank you all for hosting us here. I came to listen, to learn, to find out what's on your mind, to respond to your questions, your suggestions, your ideas, and your guidance. If you raise a hand, Cynthia Cano, who's got the microphone over here, stage left, will bring it to you, and we'll get you into the conversation. Thank you all.
Okay, so last week Congress passed the Equality Act. Last 2 years, the president's been real tough in this administration on the LGBTQ. What is your plan to bring it back to the way it was and to advance the Equality Act so that all people have a seat at the table?
Great question. Thank you for being here. So day one of our administration, we reversed the transgender troop ban to make sure that we welcome the service of every American in our armed forces and honor those who served so far. We signed the Equality Act into law to make sure that every American is treated equal in the workplace, in public life, in every single aspect of what will make this country great, because the challenges before us cannot be met by half measure, half steps, or only half the country. And in some states, like my home state, it is perfectly legal, though immoral if you ask me, to fire somebody because of their sexual orientation. In my state, it is perfectly legal, though absolutely wrong, to refuse the ability to adopt a child out of our foster care system because of your sexual orientation. We need to make sure that no state can accept itself from ensuring the basic human rights of every single one of our Americans. So not only will I take that executive action and sign that legislation, I will speak with pride about every single one of us to make sure that we're all able to contribute to our full potential. Thank you for being here.
Behind you, facing the cameras.
There you are.
Hi, my name is Chris Rice. Joe Biden was the architect of the drug war, and he brought us mass incarceration. He actually wrote the laws himself, pushed them, we are in dire need of criminal justice reform. Do you have a specific plan for criminal justice reform?
I do. Step one, end the war on drugs and the prohibition of marijuana. Expunge the arrest records of those who are serving time for possession of a substance that is legal in more than half the country right now. End for-profit prisons in the United States of America. End the cash bail system in the United States of America. Only by doing these things are we going to successfully confront the fact that we have the largest prison population on the face of the planet today, disproportionately comprised of people of color, too many doing time for nonviolent drug crimes. And though we know that Americans of all races and ethnicities use and deal illegal drugs at the same rate, only some are more likely than others to be stopped and frisked and arrested and put behind bars, and who upon release will be forced to check a box on every employment application form, making it less likely that they get the job. and who will be unable to be eligible for student loans to improve themselves through higher education. If we take those steps, and then the much more difficult step of confronting the legacy of slavery and segregation and Jim Crow and suppression of our fellow Americans that continues to this day, that has produced a kindergarten to jailhouse pipeline. Children of color 5 times as likely to be disciplined at the age of 5 years old than white kids in the same classroom in front of the same teacher for the same infraction. Then, and maybe just then, we can begin to repair the damage in this country and stop inflicting this injustice on future generations. Thank you for asking the question.
Facing the cameras in the back.
Hi, I'm Jimmy Feeney. I'm from Davenport, Iowa, and I've been looking at all the different Democratic candidates that's declared, and I'm a first-time voter, so I'm a little, I guess I would say, overwhelmed. So I want to know what makes Beto O'Rourke different and above all the rest that have declared for their candidacy.
Jimmy, thanks for being here. First of all, I'm here, and I'm listening to you, and I'm answering your questions. And I'm so often going to meet people like you. In other words, in the first 8 weeks of this campaign, I've been to 34 different college campuses. I've been to high schools, and I've even gone to middle schools. Now, I understand that they cannot vote, but I want to make sure that the issues that are most important to them are part of the conversation that we're having. And I'll give you an example. We were in a middle school in Newton and met a young woman, a girl, who said, you know, I don't want to go to school anymore, wondering if I'm going to come home from school that next day. She wants to make sure that we have a plan, like she has a plan when she goes into that classroom about how she's going to escape from an active shooter, to make sure that she doesn't have to think about that anymore going forward. So making sure that not only do we have universal background checks, but that we stop selling weapons of war into our communities. And seeing them show up in the school, red flag laws for everyone. And saying that not just where it is popular and convenient or easy, but saying it as I did in the most conservative counties, not in the state of Texas, but in the United States of America. Places that voted for Donald Trump more than 90% in the last election. Showing up, in other words, with the courage of our convictions. This question about the drug war, Susie Bird and I, almost 10 years ago, wrote a book about ending the war on drugs to meet the challenges that we face. We talk about reproductive rights in our state of Texas. It's one of those third rail issues. But we talk about it because it's important to the health care of our fellow Americans as we come to grips with a maternal mortality crisis 3 times as deadly for women of color. In other words, being able to go everywhere, even in the most conservative places, and to tell the truth, and to bring people into the conversation and the solutions, and match what we're talking about with the urgency that you and others feel on the most important issues of the day, is not only how I'm running this campaign, it's not just how we secure the nomination. It won't only allow us to defeat Donald Trump, but it is absolutely fundamental and necessary to bringing this country together around those shared solutions to our common problems. So I hope that helps you understand how we can set ourselves apart from an extraordinary field of candidates, and more importantly, serve this country at this defining moment of truth. Thanks for asking the question. Appreciate it.
To your right.
My name is Ani, and I want to know if you are going to fully fund IDEA.
Your name is Adi? Ani. Thank you for being here. Grateful. The answer is yes. IDEA, which I believe is the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, is funded at 17% of what it is needed to make sure that we are delivering world-class public school education to every child, regardless of their ability. So the federal government, under my administration, is going to step up and make sure that we support those world-class public school educators to deliver that education and that care and ensure that we're all living to our full promise and potential. Thanks for asking the question. Really impressed that you're here. Thank you.
To your left.
Here we go. Yes, sir.
Thank
Thank you. My name is John Dunchief. I'm from Davenport, Iowa. I have a question about immigration, but immigration has a lot of different sides to it. So I want you to make a statement on immigration that includes the asylum seekers that are coming to us from Latin America, the thousands and thousands of people that are living here undocumented, that are part of this community, without whom our economy would collapse, the thousands of DACA recipients in the United States who are living lives in limbo, and the 50,000 or so immigrants that are in detention right now, just awaiting their hearing. There's probably some more stuff on there, but that's enough for now. Why don't you give me that?
That'll get us started. Thank you. Thanks for being here, for asking such an important question. Here's something that I think we should all try to do. My wife Amy and I have attempted to do this. What would possess you to travel 2,000 miles from your hometown to arrive in a country where you may not speak the language and not know anyone, be a perfect stranger in a strange land, in other words? Make much of that journey on foot, some of it atop, not inside, but on the roof of a train that is called the Beast, La Bestia, for very good reason. When Amy and I are thinking about Ulysses and Molly and Henry, our 3 kids, the only way we come to the conclusion that we could ever do that is if it was the only thing that we could do in order to save their lives. And when we meet these families in El Paso or along the US-Mexico border and listen to their stories, that's exactly what is happening in their lives. They are fleeing the deadliest places on the planet today, compounded by other factors like climate change. In Honduras, those farmers are planting what their parents and grandparents planted and grew, and it is no longer growing amidst historic droughts. We're seeing in other parts of the world as well. And we have these asylum laws that say if you come to our country and there's no other place that you can go and your government cannot keep you alive, there is a process that you can follow. It doesn't guarantee you that you'll be able to stay here, but will at least guarantee you that due process and that legal protection. This administration not only is refusing to honor our own laws, and remember, we are a nation of laws. Yeah. It is also placing those kids who have survived that 2,000-mile journey in cages. It is deporting their parents back to the very countries from which they fled in the first place. And it has separated countless families who may never know if they'll see one another again. And even if they do, there is so much damage done to that kid. We've been there during those reunions where that child, that 6 or 7-year-old who hasn't seen her mother for months, finally does. No smile, no tears of joy, no nothing on that kid's face. An inability to connect or attach again with the one human being with whom they associate the greatest pain and suffering a human heart can know. And so you ask, what do we do about this? At a minimum, we do not meet them with cages or walls or this inhumanity and cruelty, but we welcome them with our own laws and an ability for them to be here together as a family. We reunite every single one of those families, spare no expense to do so that they can be together and be well. And then this, the greatest country the world has ever known, trains its focus not on the border and a $30 billion wall, but seeing what we can do to assist those people in Honduras, in Guatemala, in El Salvador, investing in violence reduction and prevention so no mom ever has to contemplate any journey that looks anything like that. What we know is from the meager investment that we've already made, when we connect those dollars to reducing violence, the outcomes are better, fewer families feel like they have to flee. You asked about the millions who are here, undocumented status. More than 1 million of them we call dreamers. Came here at a young age, are contributing just as much as anyone else is to the success of this country, just as American as your kids or mine. Let's free them from any fear of future deportation by making them U.S. citizens in this their true home country. And then your last point absolutely brought home to me on a recent visit to Storm Lake. We were about to hold a town hall just like this one. To our surprise, in that town hall in Storm Lake, the questions came at us in English and in Spanish. And before we started, we went to a little bakery owned by a recent immigrant. The whole conversation we had with him was in Spanish. And he said, look, there are so many cousins of mine who would also like to open jobs here. They came here following the meatpacking work, And now they want to invest their savings in the strength and success of this community, but they do not have status or citizenship in order to be able to do that. Imagine the economic potential we would unleash if we legalized people who've already been here for decades, working the toughest, hardest, most backbreaking work that frankly almost no one in this room is willing to do, nor will your kids be willing to do it, to make us a better country. Let's bring them into the light. And then finally, let's rewrite this country's immigration laws in our own image, by our own values, informed by our own experiences. Lift the visa caps so no one has to wait 20 or 25 years to join their family or to work a job for whom we cannot find anybody right now. And we should be able to do that not as Democrats, not as Republicans, but as Americans, because this is our tradition, this country of immigrants and refugees and asylum seekers. Thanks for the question. Appreciate that.
Hi, I'm Cassandra Dowell. I am a proud graduate of Iowa State University. I am a first-generation, low-income student. I have a question. Like my other fellow classmates, we are currently suffering in the student debt crisis. I myself am facing default on one or two or even more of my student loans. What is your plan to help solve the student debt crisis?
First of all, you're using the right word for this. This is a crisis. $1.5 trillion in outstanding student loan debt. And you had the courage to use your personal story to illustrate the fact that 10% are at risk of or in the process of defaulting on that debt. And if you think about it, what are we doing? We're asking you to take out loans so that you can get the education to be a school teacher or a therapist at the VA or a civil engineer to build some of this infrastructure that we need in this community and across this country. We should be investing in you. And so I want to do that. Here are a couple of ideas. One, in your instance, let's radically expand the public service loan forgiveness program. If you're willing to move back to a community that is underserved, in an occupation that is in demand, if you're willing to connect with those kids in that classroom or serve those veterans who come back for service, let's wipe clean and clear your debt. And let's do it right away. At a minimum, if you don't want to or don't qualify for that program, let's refinance existing debt at the lowest possible rates so that it's affordable for you to pursue your career, your passion, reveal your genius to the rest of us. And then in addition to that, let's stop digging the hole. So let's make sure that community college is free for every single American. Let's add that by ensuring that you pursue a four-year degree or higher degree education. We're able to do that debt-free based on your means. I want to make sure that cost is not an object in your ability to improve yourself. And then lastly, I want to make sure that we do not leave out people who choose not to pursue college. I want to make sure that you graduate from high school both college ready and career ready and able to connect with a union who will allow you to learn a trade or a skill, pursue a profession, who will allow you to command a living wage for the rest of your life. So those are some ways I think we can approach it. Thank you.
To your right, by the doors.
Kevin O'Brien, over 40 years of union member and over 40 years enforcing the federal minimum wage. One thing on the minimum wage, just relating to the college, when I went to college, I could work 1,500 hours at minimum wage and paid for the whole year. My son went to the same college, he had to work 6,000 hours at minimum wage to pay for it. But that shows you where minimum wage is. But then the other thing is healthcare. I have 5 children, all college grads, all got good jobs, but their healthcare is half as good as mine, and they're paying a fortune for it. So what are we going to do on healthcare, minimum wage?
This low minimum wage in some states, $7.25. This health care that leaves tens of millions of our fellow Americans out of any care at all, if you think about it, is the most expensive way to do this. If you have to get your mental health care at the county jail, because it's the one place you can go, and in Texas, the largest provider of mental health care services is the county jail system. The largest mental health care inpatient facility is the Harris County Jail. $110 a night to keep someone locked up, to lock up their potential and who they are just so that they can get care. No one should have to do that. And no one should have to pay for that for a fraction of the cost. Imagine the world-class outpatient mental health care we can provide. Free that person to pursue their potential. Whatever they were placed on this planet to do, they're now well enough to be able to get that done. It adds to our economic growth. Imagine if you didn't have to seek care in an emergency room because you got it proactively and consistently, and it was of high quality. So the program that I support, Medicare for America, says if you are currently uninsured, let's enroll you in Medicare today. If you are under or insufficiently insured, in other words, you cannot afford the copays or bridge the deductibles or afford that premium, you can choose to enroll in Medicare as well. But if you have employer-sponsored insurance and you like it because it works for you and your family, you're able to keep that. It is the surest, fastest way to make sure that we get to universal, guaranteed, high-quality health care. And then on this economic argument that you're making, let's move $7.25 up to $15 an hour as the floor everywhere. Let's ensure that we have paid family leave so you can take care of yourself and your kids and your folks. Let's end discrimination in the workplace. Why in the world, in the year 2019, are African American women making 61 cents on the dollar, Latinas 53 cents on the dollar? Talk about unlocking economic opportunity and potential and an engine for this economy and just living up to our principles that we are all created equal. So let's enshrine that in our founding document, the Constitution, by ratifying the Equal Rights Amendment to make sure that no woman is treated differently than any man in any respect in this country. So thank you, sir, for the question.
Same area to the right. Here we go.
Hi there, I'm Sarah. I am coming to you on behalf of special education teachers here. I teach in Davenport. I haven't been home yet. There are lots of other teachers in the room. I'm happy to see so many familiar faces. I also haven't been home because I was at our executive board education association meeting. And as you may or may not know, we have lost collective bargaining. And that strips us of all of our ability to fight on behalf of our kids. And we haven't had lunches or preps or been paid adequately in ages, and that is inconsequential to the lack of funding that our kids need, that our classrooms need for the textbooks, et cetera, et cetera. So could you talk to me about how you view collective bargaining as well as funding public education as an entirety? Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. First of all, you are my hero. Thank you for what you do and for your public service. My youngest sister, Erin, was a special education student. And I saw, we talked about IDEA earlier, and Texas, where we fail to pay our public school educators a living wage, and nearly half of them are working a second and third job. I saw what her teachers did, their sacrifice for their students, very often working that other job, but also very often out of their own pocket, paying for not only classroom decorations, not only school supplies, for that kid who's on free and reduced breakfast and lunch, who does not have a dinner to look forward to. That teacher was very often paying for that dinner. That set of clothes for the kid who showed up in the same jeans and t-shirt Monday through Thursday, Friday out of her own pocket, though she doesn't have enough to make ends meet at home for herself. That kid, because his ability to learn is tied to his dignity and sense of self-worth, that teacher has sacrificed yet again. And then knowing that we have an epidemic in this country of gun violence, because we have an inability to form the political will to meet it, and that we ask teachers to also contemplate making that sacrifice, to then not allow them to organize and bargain for better working conditions, better wages, and better delivery of instruction to those students is the stupidest thing I've ever heard of in my life. And if that Republican legislature in Iowa thought it was being smart in denying that ability, they may have in some calculation been penny wise, but they are pound foolish. We have a teacher shortage in Iowa today because of that. Minnesota has just received a bumper crop of calculus teachers, physics teachers, and social studies teachers paid for by the citizens of Iowa because those teachers can no longer afford to stay here. And then we saw the heartbreaking ruling on Friday, 4-3, sustaining this terribly misguided decision in 2017. So you ask where I am on this. absolutely fundamental to the success of this country that teachers and other public sector employees be able to organize, use the leverage of the value that they provide to get better for all of us in this country, and to make sure that when we talk about a world-class public education system, it begins with world-class public school educators who are paid a true living wage so they can focus on one job and one job alone. Thank you for what you do. Appreciate it.
Yes, there are tons of things that need to be done in this country, we all know that. How are you going to do that and possibly shrink the national debt without diluting it?
How does this all add up, you're asking, right? $22 trillion in debt right now. And we're adding to it to the tune of $1 trillion annually through deficit spending. By the way, under President Trump. Any presumption that Republicans still are owed or have earned the mantle of fiscal responsibility is completely out the window with that $1 trillion in deficit spending. How did we get here? The wars that we've been fighting since 9/11 have added, gossy, almost $6 trillion to that debt. Unfunded tax cuts under the George W. Bush administration, $2 trillion in tax cuts in the Donald Trump administration. Imagine the people of the future looking back on 2017 and 2018 and they're saying, you had $4 trillion in outstanding infrastructure needs. You weren't paying your teachers a living wage. Tens of millions couldn't get health care. And your answer to that was to cut a $2 trillion tax break to the very wealthiest in this country and to corporations who are already sitting on record piles of cash. Who were these pendejos of 2017 and 2018? They're going to ask. So how do we respond to that? One, again, let's stop digging the hole. Let's reverse the worst of the Trump tax cuts. They took the corporate rate from 35% all the way down to 21%. If you only took it back up to 28%, not all the way to where it was, you would generate hundreds of billions of dollars over the next 10 years. If you were to tax capital at the same rate that you tax wages and ordinary income, hundreds of billions of dollars more to make investments in people and communities that spur long-term economic growth. If you made sure that everyone was well enough and educated enough to fulfill their potential in our country and in this economy, you really then have an America that is firing on all cylinders. It took us a long time to get to 22. It'll take us a long time, frankly, to get out of it. But if we make those changes to the tax code, if we make those investments in people and communities, we will be able to do this. Thanks for asking the question.
Hi, I'm Anna Sophia, and I know you've already touched on this, but I'm a teenager, and I've grown up in an age where there's a school shooting after a school shooting after a school shooting. What's your plan to decrease gun violence?
Yeah. Thank you for being here. Let's take the same approach and ask how we got here. So we lose more than 30,000 of our fellow Americans to gun violence. No other country, almost without exception, comes even close. So is there something just inherently violent about us? Are we just bad people? Is this our fate and our lot in life? Or did something else happen? And when I look at the laws that are on the books, the inability for the Centers for Disease Control to actually study gun violence, originally by mandate, by law, as though we were scared of what we might find. Imagine 40 years ago if the United States Congress said, Surgeon General, you cannot look into the connection between tobacco, smoking, lung cancer, and deaths in this country. That's exactly what we're doing with gun violence right now. The complicity, the silence purchased by the NRA, their political action committees, the gun lobby, the fear that instills in my former colleagues in Congress, who refuse to take action on even the most sensible gun policy. Those states that have adopted universal background checks, for example, have seen a near 50% reduction in gun violence. It is a no-brainer. Gun owners, non-gun owners, Republicans, Democrats alike agree on that. The only place it is not popular is with the gun lobbies and with those members of Congress whom they have purchased. It's one of the reasons that this campaign does not accept a dime from a single lobbyist, political action committee, corporation, or special interest. It's all people. Freeing us to make decisions for people, for human beings, not for guns, not for the gun lobby. So on all those things that we described earlier, ensuring that we don't sell weapons of war into our communities, red flag laws, so that if someone poses a danger to themselves or to someone else in your life or in my life, we stop them before it's too late. These are common sense solutions that we can achieve when we return our focus back to people, and that's exactly where I am with you right now. So thank you for being here. Appreciate it.
I'm Jack Weesey. I'm actually coming across the river from Illinois. I know you touched a little bit on budget and how you want to try to get us back to be fiscally responsible, but a lot of times we talk about what we're going to add and all the programs we're going to add, and I'm curious if there are specific programs that you believe should be cut in order to help us be more fiscally responsible, and what programs would those be?
Yeah. So I think it's important to scrutinize every cent that is spent that was generated by the hard work of the people here in this room and across this country. I think it's also really important to look at where we're spending the greatest sums of money and answer the question about the deficit and the debt. I mentioned the tax cuts, which I've talked about reversing, but I've also mentioned the wars that we're in. I'm 46 years old, will turn 47 in September. For my entire adult life, we have been at war in Iraq. Almost 28 years and counting so far, with no end in sight, no definition of victory, no commonly understood strategy. The loss of life, fellow Americans, the lives that we've asked our fellow Americans to take in the name of this country, and the trillions of dollars that we've spent and that we are on the line for if we're going to fulfill our obligation to every service member who returns to this country, who will now qualify for the post-9/11 GI Bill, for housing, for health care, and help for the rest of their lives. These wars are an expensive proposition, and you know that we're not just in Iraq, we're in Afghanistan in our 18th year, but the authorization for the use of military force passed in 2001 also underpins our presence in Syria, in Yemen, in Somalia, in Libya, and those are just a half dozen of the countries that we're using military force in right now. We need to lead not with the military, and those young women and men who carry the weight of our foreign policy right now on their backs. We need to lead with diplomacy, with an ability to convene the other countries of this planet around otherwise intractable problems. We need to save more of those lives, bring them back home to their communities, to their families, to their country. And that savings in life and that ability to save what we are spending going forward will allow us to realize the ability to invest in those other priorities that we described and to begin paying down the deficit and the debt that we are accruing at this moment. So there are ways to do this. It's going to involve all of us coming together to ensure that we do this, but we have that opportunity before us right now. Thanks for asking the question.
I appreciate very much hearing everything that you've been saying. I basically agree with almost everything you've said. You seem like you are a decent person and that you are educated in the positions that you're talking about. One of the heartbreaks with Obama is that I thought the same thing for him. And so when you get there, let's just say you prevail. And you win the hearts of Americans and you go to Washington, D.C. How are you going to make it happen there?
I'll tell you, there was no person more inspiring in public life, in my life, than Barack Obama. I was going to walk through walls to that guy in 2008. And probably no greater president in my lifetime, and I'm projecting forward down the road. He was just an extraordinary leader. One of the frustrations, though, during those 8 years, is so many people who were willing to walk through walls, and some of you did walk through walls here in Iowa, no longer felt connected to the mission, to the policies, and to the goals during that administration. I think it's incredibly important, should I have the chance to serve in the White House, that this urgency, this energy that we all have and we all feel here tonight, and I hope throughout the course of this campaign, is brought to bear on achieving our policy goals. Whether it is healthcare for all as quickly as we can get there, whether it's an economy that is opened up to everyone's ability to participate, whether it's being able to afford college or the college debt that you already have, by continuing to go back to these communities, coming back to Davenport and making the case right here so that we apply the pressure to the member of Congress, whoever succeeds Dave Loebsack going forward. And then especially perhaps in those Republican districts, to make sure that those constituents in Storm Lake, who I believe is represented by, is that Representative King? That's right. That's right. And so let's go past Steve King directly to his constituents, make the case to them, and involve them in the work to make sure that we get this done. Look, I'm under no illusion. I'm not naive about the forces that we face. It is not just Donald Trump. There is no more, I'm trying to use polite language here, but you know what I'm talking about when I talk about Mitch McConnell, who effectively stripped Barack Obama of the last year of his presidency when it came to nominating to the Supreme Court, who said his number one goal was not delivering for this country, was not making sure that our economy grew, was not delivering for his fellow Americans, but stopping Barack Obama in his tracks. So listen, if we play nicely by the set rules, we're going to end up with the same results. If we go around some of these intransigent members of Congress, if we build a majority in both houses of Congress to make sure that we deliver this legislation, and that rests on all of us to do the work to make it possible, then we'll be able to achieve this ambitious agenda. Thank you.
We're behind you. Here we go.
I'm behind you.
Hi, Henry Markwood. I'm with the Muscatine County Democrats. Didn't get a chance to ask this question when you were down visiting us a few weeks ago. I just retired from a defense contractor. So I've spent a lot of time in the Middle East and a lot of time in Saudi Arabia, which is one of the most oppressive places you can go. For the last number of years, we have backed the Saudi government no matter what. We are building massive air bases, naval bases, a huge intelligence complex, all in Saudi Arabia. We support the Saudi economic blockade of Qatar. We support the Saudi military occupation in Bahrain. And now we have 125,000 troops and a carrier group apparently getting ready to start a war with Iraq for the benefit of Saudi Arabia, which is really, intervening in what has been a 700-year-old religious dispute between the two, groups in Islam. What's your policy towards, the Middle East and particularly Saudi Arabia that feels, that it can kill an American resident with impunity?
Yeah. Thanks for the question. Listen. What you just described is part of an absolutely disastrous foreign policy under this administration. Turning his back on our traditional allies and the democracies these alliances forged in sacrifice, and embracing these strongmen and dictators, Vladimir Putin, Duterte, al-Sisi, and then MBS in Saudi Arabia, someone who has the blood of an American resident, Khashoggi, and journalist, whom he was able to kill with absolute impunity, who's bombing Yemen into the last century, hospitals, school buses, and schools, indiscriminate killing of civilians, and bringing to the precipice the worst humanitarian disaster since World War II, and we are functionally co-combatants in that war. Our Congress, in a rare display of bipartisan leadership, tried to stop our participation with Saudi Arabia in what is happening in Yemen, and this president vetoed that action. As president, I would hold everyone accountable to our standards and to our values. I would get us out of this war in Yemen. I would not threaten to invade yet another Middle Eastern country, as this president threatens to do with Iran today. I would follow the lead of the previous president and make sure that without firing a single shot, without invading yet another country, we were able to halt Iran's progress towards obtaining a nuclear weapon. And every challenge that we face, I bring allies to the table with me, those alliances and friendships that are core to our success around the world. So thank you for asking the question. Appreciate that.
Hi, my name is Lydia. I'm a college student here. I go to St. Ambrose University. I'm just wondering what you plan to do about the abortion ban and women's reproductive rights.
We were asked the question earlier about healthcare, and I talked about universal healthcare, and I talked about primary healthcare, I talked about mental healthcare. I want to also make sure that when we're talking about healthcare, we're talking about every woman's ability to make her own decisions about her own body and have access to the healthcare that allows her to do that. As president, I will make sure that we use everything within our power to guarantee that that is still the case going forward. Any nominee that we consider must be able to share with us that Roe versus Wade was correctly decided, is the law of the land. I will work with our allies in Congress to make sure that by statute we prevent states like Alabama from exempting women in their own states from being able to access safe, legal abortion. And also, as a consequence, the ability to get a cervical cancer screening, see a family planning provider, see a provider of any kind through so much of the rest of America. Our Department of Justice will side with women in every single one of these cases, so that there's no doubt about the position that we take. And then I will do everything in my power to stop these kind of efforts in other states and stop bad legislation like this in Congress going forward. This is literally a life or death issue, and we need to make sure that we stand up for the lives of all the women in this country. So thank you for asking the question. Appreciate it.
I know there are a lot of hands up. I only have time for a few more. I'm sorry if I didn't get to you.
Just address the energy issue and how that relates to Iowa, and what freedom does that give with solar power and wind?
Absolutely. So one of the things that I've learned and now love about Iowa is that this state, you all are absolute leaders when it comes to transforming our economy and this country from a dependence on fossil fuels to renewable energy. I think you're second only to Kansas in the amount of wind that you generate as a share of your total energy portfolio. You all understand this better than most of the rest of the country. Not only are we delivering on our commitment to the next generation, but we're creating high-wage, high-value, high-skilled jobs. The two fastest-growing occupations in the United States today are wind jobs and solar jobs. Our plan to combat climate change is the most ambitious that has been presented thus far in this country. It calls for a mobilization of $5 trillion over the next 10 years to speed the transfer that we are talking about, to ensure that by 2050, we were at net zero greenhouse gas emissions, that we're halfway there by 2030, that we invest in Davenport and Pacific Junction and Houston, Texas, and the cities that are on the front line of climate change right now to improve their resiliency. And that those communities who have been hit hardest, very often lower income and communities of color, are put first in the transformation of this economy so that everyone has a chance to be able to enjoy the fruits of our labor and the changes taking place. And then to this question about foreign policy, we need to convene the other powers of the world to make sure that they do their part as well. Not just sign back on to Paris, which we will do day one, but find a far more ambitious multilateral agreement that gets all of us to keeping this planet from warming 2 degrees Celsius. Thank you for asking.
Hi, my name is Ricky Saldivar. Excuse my French, but I worked my ass off for a lot of years. And now I've been fighting Social Security for, I think it's now 7 years. Is there a plan to make it go faster for people who I've had several surgeries and worked hard and just trying to get through life before I basically had to lose everything, and I'm still fighting it? So I need to know if there's a plan, not only for me, but for the future, for Social Security.
Yeah, Ricky, thank you for asking the question. As you just said, you worked so hard over the course of your life, every single working day, paying in to Social Security. Now we got to make sure that Social Security and this government works for you. As president, I will make sure that that happens. I'll make sure that we invest in Social Security. We know right now that we are not generating enough revenue into that program for it to be able to fulfill its commitments. It's why I helped introduce a bill as a member of Congress, and will sign this as president, called the Social Security 2100 Act. What it means is that right now we arbitrarily cap the taxes paid on income into Social Security at like $129,000. This says that for those who are making hundreds of thousands or millions or billions more, the additional income is taxed so that we have the revenue necessary to ensure the viability of that program into the next century, to make sure we deliver for you and other working Americans. Thanks for asking the question.
Okay, this is going to be our last question.
My name's Emma. I'm 24. I was wondering what you're going to do to address the opioid epidemic. It's running rampant in places, especially like Iowa and Ohio comes to mind. So I was just wondering.
Thank you, Emma. So we lost more than 70,000 of our fellow Americans last year to drug overdose deaths, the majority of them being opioid deaths. And what I've learned from listening to survivors and families who are struggling with this, and from doctors and those who are studying this, is that the vast majority of those addictions and those overdoses began with a legally prescribed opioid. And we were just asked a question about criminal justice earlier, and I was talking about people who are locked up for possession of marijuana, a substance that's legal in more than half the country right now. And yet those who marketed those opioids and said that they were this miracle painkiller, not addictive, though it turns out they knew something to the contrary. Not a single one of them has spent a single night in jail or paid any significant consequence whatsoever. They've been able to purchase that impunity that allows this problem to continue. I want to make sure that our Department of Justice pursues this case vigorously to bring to account and to justice those who are responsible for so many of these tens of thousands of deaths. I want to make sure that those who've been prescribed opioids and are struggling with addiction right now are treated not as a criminal justice problem, but as a public health opportunity, long-term recovery and treatment and care, get them back on their feet, make sure they're okay. So often, this was not a decision that they willingly made. I talk to veterans at meetings just like these who tell me that they were prescribed an opioid at the VA, became addicted, were cut off, and are now buying heroin on the street. That veteran who put his life on the line for this country came back hurt, needing help, and is doing everything he can to take care of himself in the absence of care from this country, is not somebody who should be in jail. He's somebody that we should take care of right now. So I want to make sure that we invest in those programs that we're seeing across this country, in Ohio, in Pennsylvania, in New Hampshire, that are meeting people without the criminal justice system's involvement to get them the long-term care that they need. I want to make sure that there is accountability, and I want to make sure there are treatment options right now. That same veteran, in so many cases, could have been prescribed medicinal cannabis, non-addictive, you cannot overdose from it, it will not kill you. And many doctors at the VA want to be able to prescribe it or prevent it by federal law now from doing that. Let's end the prohibition on marijuana to make sure that we can deliver care that makes sense for those veterans and others. So thank you for the question. Thank you all for welcoming us out, for being with us here tonight. We are very grateful. Gracias y nos vemos la próxima vez. Adiós.